Christine.
Hang on. Hi.
How are you today?
Very well.
Thank you so much for joining me. I was so excited when you accepted this invitation after seeing my post about your book, Metropolitan Stories. You guys all saw my post on Sunday, and I got lots and lots of comments saying, oh my gosh, I'm going to run out and buy a copy. So here we have the author. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the book support. And there's nothing I like better than a happy reader.
Truly, truly. Well, I have to say, my readers know that I am always searching for books set in New York City, not only because New York is near and dear to my heart, but I just think there is no better setting. But then when you make the New York City setting the Met, and the book, that the way that you wrote this, it was absolutely delightful. But I don't know how it missed me. And I'm going to give a shout out to Catherine at Gilmore Guide, is her handle on Instagram. She's absolutely lovely, and she is a co-host on a podcast called Sarah's Bookshelves Live. I think Sarah's Bookshelves Live. And I will actually, maybe I'll tag them in the comments, but it was Catherine who mentioned this in her, gem, I think it was the last episode, maybe 2022. Have you found the episode? I saw you questioned about it on the post.
I haven't found it, but I got a lot of traction. I think it was something about which I thought was funny, that it was about old books, which was, my book came out in 2019. So I think it was about not the fresh new pile, but the books over the last couple of years that you remember.
Gems. It was probably backlist gems, because
something
they do
like that. Yeah.
to do, and we all love to talk about backlist, because I think there's a preponderancy on Bookstagram, obviously, to be chasing the new releases, which I get that, but honestly, I find some of my best reading, probably 75% of, my 5-star reads are backlist. So I guess you are considered backlist being 20.
I know. It's fine.
That's okay. But anyway, I would like to open this with you giving a synopsis of what Metropolitan Stories is all about.
Oh, well, sure. Well, I think the most important thing to start with is that it is a novel. And while it is a very well-informed novel written by someone who worked at the Met for 25 years, and there's lots of detail that is very much based in my experience. The characters and the situations are very much fictionalized, and the way that it's done is that it's told, there's 16 chapters told from 16 different points of view. And that was a way for me to kind of capture an institution that is 2,200 people and 4 blocks long and 2 blocks deep, and to sort of capture the magnitude of that from all the different characters who occupy that place and are devoted to it as much as I was as well. So, I think there's people go to the Met kind of once in a while, and some people go once in a lifetime. And I got to live there for 25 years. Every day and every night, I walked through those galleries.
A dream.
Just often at night, only hearing my own footsteps on those marble floors. And I think there's something that happens when you have that sort of relationship with an institution where you start to see things differently. And so what this book was an attempt to capture was what it feels like to live there, and how some of those objects, brought me a different point of view about their own history and ideas around them, and what is it like to survive for centuries. And so this book was my way of writing a love letter to a place that has art that I feel like could be treated like human beings, and human beings that are kind of works of art, in the staff that has dedicated their lives to it.
Absolutely. That's a great That's a great way to describe it. It was a book. I love to open. My readers always know that if I love a book, I always open with a quote. The lights are flickering here. I'm like, are we about to lose? Our ice storm cometh in Texas. That I open with quotes, and within the situation reviewing your book, I opened with two. I couldn't decide. It was just the whole book was full of lines that just as a lover of art and museums, and that's something that we've been doing as a family. Like I said, our middle daughter makes her life is around art, but we've always, taken our children to other countries. We've always went from Vermont to New York City, and always were in the Met and the other museums, and it just becomes a part of who you are. But the Met is an especially unique institution for sure, and it becomes ingrained in people's lives. The last time I was there, it was like, well, what else are we going to do? Well, of course we're going to go to the Met. So anyway, this was lovely. And I have to say, in my post, I did something very unique. I highlighted not only this cover, which I know the light is catching it, but remind us what painting this is. Can you guys all see it?
Oh, that's Elizabeth Morse.
Okay.
Susan Morse. Sorry, Susan Morse.
Susan Morse, and it's hard to
it's
see.
An American 19th century American painting. I mean, she's in the book for like 2 sentences.
Right.
But the designer who created the book jacket, I think, really captured something in using her with that kind of telegraphed image.
Right. I was trying to figure out how you say that, the telegraphed image. It's stunning.
I think there's something about this woman observing, and whether that's me or anyone who is looking at the museum, but then seeing this kind of resonance of an object, the painting itself, and that sort of way in which it is resonating, I think is also capturing the way that I am treating the works of art in this book, not just as art historical masterpieces, but as things that have their own lives. And I think we often, because of the way the museum treats these objects, and I think that's completely appropriate, but it isolates them and you sort of think about them as these precious works of art where they are now, without actually dialing back and thinking about the path they've taken to get to that point. And so I think the second chapter of the book is from the perspective of an 18th century chair in the 18th century period rooms in the museum. And that chair, I chose that chair mainly because it still has its original upholstery, which is very rare. But I like to think about the fact that that chair, because of that original upholstery, also kind of holds 18th century dust and 18th century dandruff, and the stuff of the 18th century is still physically in that chair. And the path that chair has taken to wind up in our galleries is something we often don't consider beyond who made it and who bought it and where it was. But I like to think about like its time in storage and its time before it came to the museum, and before it was, and sort of after it was a star and before it came to the museum. And so as you sort of pull that thread and think about objects in that way, I think they have more to tell us than just their art historical significance. And I think there's a lot of solace to be found in the survival of the objects in the Met, and what they have seen and what they have kind of witnessed in history. And I think sometimes the beauty of the Met can almost detract from that point of view, because you're looking at it as a perfect example of something. And it's nice to break that barrier every once in a while and give voice to those objects.
It was an incredibly original way to write this love letter, and I hope other readers get to experience it. It's such a complete joy. But what I want to segue to is what I thought was so interesting is that your audio cover, and with the light, is totally different this is my iPad, from the book cover. And this is
Oh,
actually.
well, I don't have anything to do with that. I mean, no, the author doesn't really control that.
That was my question.
Yeah, no, the audiobook, I mean, I got to choose who read the book. Jill Eikenberry does an amazing job and is perfect for what I wanted in terms of the person reading the book, but the cover is up to them.
That's what I wondered. Even this cover.
No, the cover, I got to choose the cover, but I mean, it's different for every author, but I had cover approval, but the audiobook is just, it has its own life. And so the company who buys the audio rights to the book then produces that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, tell us a little bit about what you actually, in what capacity you worked at the Met.
Well, I'm unusual because I had a lot of different roles in the museum. I mean, I started at the Met as a very, very low level assistant. And so some of the echoes of that are in the book, in the sense that the period covered in the book is really the first 10 years of my time there. So I started there I was an intern there in 1991, and then came back after graduate school to work there. And so I started there in 1994. So it was a completely analog world. It's before email. And, as an assistant, I was often kind of delivering memos around the building, and a lot of what the rite of passage is in a place like the Met is sort of owning the geography of that place, and how you get from one office to the other is often very complex because every office is sort of hidden within the scope of those galleries. And there's the basement passages, and there's lots of ways to navigate that. And so I think that one of the great things that happens to you as a staff member of the Met is you kind of conquer that very complex geography. And as an assistant, that was very much a part of my day. But what that also meant is it put me in the room with very important people, often on the sidelines, in a way that I don't think people experience today with email and when everything's sort of done online. I would often have to go have somebody sign something. And I think that physical proximity to these very larger than life characters who ran the museum then allowed me kind of access that someone of that level wouldn't have now. And so I was fascinated by the whole game. And eventually rose up the ranks of the museum. I was a speechwriter for 8 years. I left the museum in April of 2019 after 25 years. And at that point, I was a senior writer there. So I think having that experience that pulled me from that very low assistant level to a more senior level actually put me in a place to be witness to a lot. And much of this book pulls from those experiences, not in a way that I wrote about while I was there. I mean, I never kept a journal or took notes and never thought about it as a book. But there is a kind of sort of family lore in the museum about certain things that happen, and these stories get told over and over again. One of the chapters in the book is devoted to the staff cafeteria in the museum, which is thoroughly unremarkable, but it's kind of where these stories are kept alive because everybody repeats these stories again and again and again. And a lot of the nuggets of the stories in this book come from those events. There's a moment in the book where a young woman delivers a memo to the director, and it's a briefing memo because he's going to have a meeting with Karl Lagerfeld. And this director, who is very powerful and filled with arrogance, receives this memo, and it says, "Mr. Lagerfeld will bring his muse. The muse will not speak. Do not address the muse." And that was a memo that I actually delivered in about 1996. And I remember at the time thinking, well, wouldn't it be interesting if the director himself brought his own muse, and there was like a muse showdown between Karl Lagerfeld and the director of the Met, and that we have plenty of muses to choose from. But then it's only 23 years later I was actually writing that story that eventually winds up in the book about the director of the Met shopping for a muse from the actual works of art. And so I think moments like that, while they're repeated again and again, they were the kind of stewing that had to take place before I actually started writing.
That's fascinating. So did you leave to pursue a career as an author? Was that
well, the Met gave me a sabbatical in 2017 to write the novel, which was wonderful and very generous of them. So and a great thing, because I had a deadline. I mean, I had exactly a year to write the book, and it literally took exactly a year to do it. I think partially because that was the time I was allotted.
Right.
So I took that year and I wrote it, and then I went back and I was working on a big project. And I think there was just a moment where I had another novel that I'm working on now that I wanted to write, and I couldn't take another sabbatical, but it just became this sort of sense that every word I was writing for the museum was a word I could be writing for myself. And to me, that was kind of a signal that maybe it was time to leave home. I mean, I'm certainly was raised in that museum, and then it sort of felt like maybe I need to go off and do this. And I haven't given up that place and all that it means to me, and all the people there who are certainly what I would consider my family, and I still have all of my access and all of that. But it was time to just do this thing, which is write full time.
That's great. Well, so that was my segue, what you just said. You are writing. Again, I had a couple people, Catherine specifically, who's the one who, highlighted this, who asked me to ask, are you writing something else?
Yes, I'm writing something now. So I'm about a third of the way through. So I think, I'm also giving myself another deadline. So probably finish it by June.
Also art centric, or is that too personal?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I'm a one-trick pony.
That's okay. That's okay. There's a lot of us out there. I mean, I am always searching for art. What I call art.
Less Met-centric, but definitely
it's still. Oh, wow, even better.
It's not. It doesn't take place in the Met, so it's a different thing. But
Great.
Yeah, I didn't want to keep writing the same, but there's certainly more to be said.
That's great. Well, we'll all look forward to that. And okay, so my final question is always kind of my favorite question, and really, I as a writer, I'm sure you are a reader, and I love to ask who some of your favorite authors are, some of your favorite books. What books do you like to recommend or gift? Like anything. What are you reading now? That sort of thing.
I'm a funny hybrid. I sort of feel like I need to read the new things that come out. There's an amazing book out right now by Hilma Wolitzer called Today a Woman Went Mad in the Supermarket. That's my absolute favorite book lately, which was recommended to me by my local bookshop. And I've given it to everyone I know because I just think it's incredible. The author's 92 years old. She wrote a lot of these essays and stories when she was in like 1969, 1970, and they're still completely relevant today. Fantastic. But I also go back to my old guys all the time. I'm looking right now at Cheever. This is my Bible. Cheever, Fitzgerald, Graham Greene, Julian Barnes. those boys never disappoint. And I think for me as a writer, their way of writing is the most powerful for me. Their style, their the sort of evocative way that they write. I think that's always, so to me, that's the warm cup of tea go-to place that I can read while I'm writing. So I think I'm also someone who I don't like to read a lot of new things while I'm writing, because I think it affects the writing and is distracting. So I like to go back to Cheever because it's not going to mess with what I'm thinking. It'll just make it better. So
You're not the first author to say that. I've heard other authors say that, and that they don't like to, that while they're in the process, they don't like to, be influenced.
Yeah. But, I mean, I like to read because it's comforting, but I like to read something that's familiar so that it's not affecting, because I think it can mess with your rhythm somehow, to be distracted by something new and shiny and innovative, and it can probably, a little paralyzing. But I think for, a book that, when I was writing this book, I really was absorbing structure a lot. The idea of telling a story from 16 different points of view, and finding the right way to reveal information to the reader as they go, and how that would work and unfold, so that in the end, it's not a collection of short stories, but it is a novel, because you need to read those stories in order, because I'm telling you things as we go. So if you just dove into the 11th chapter, you wouldn't really understand it in the way that you need those other previous 10 chapters to understand. And that structure was very, very important to me, how to make that work, and not easy in the end, after the writing was all done, to find the best rhythm for how it would work, and what you would know, and when you would know it, and what would repeat itself. And I think there's lots of that the reader doesn't even recognize is happening. But in the aggregate, the experience is that you feel supported, and there's a sort of solid foundation. So when, the chair starts talking about survival or whatever it is, you feel like you've got a strong enough foundation in this world that I've created to take that leap of the imagination with me. Otherwise, I think it can feel very untethered when you're introducing that kind of surrealism into storytelling, and into other very straightforward stories that all of a sudden go off the rails a little bit. I think you have to give the reader an armature in order to do that.
That's true. It's a very fine line. But I have to say, when the chair started talking, I thought, wow, this is going to be good. I just knew. I was like in for.
Well, and I think that's a real deciding point for some people. That chair story is very early in the book, and it's very short. It's only a few pages.
Right.
And I feel like if you read those 3 pages and you had the response that you had, that like, wow, okay, then you're going to have a great time. But if you at that point are just like, this is nuts, I kind of feel like you should put it down.
Yeah, well, every book is what we say all the time.
So everything, every book is not for everyone, and that's absolutely fine. But I also think I was really amazed and delighted by how many people were willing to take that leap with me, and go on this ride and go where this book ultimately goes. And I think I didn't quite realize how many people have that kind of imagination, or found it in reading this book. And I think that's a delight for a writer. There's nothing more satisfying than to understand that readers are willing to go where you take them, and enjoy that. Absolutely. I also love a long story, like a really long chapter and then a really short chapter.
I agree.
There are several moments in the book where longer chapters have a kind of coda later on,
Hmm.
The guy who loses the briefcase and the person who finds the briefcase later on. By separating those things into two separate things, I feel like it starts to bracket the experience in a way that again makes the reader feel like they're part of this world. And sure, lots of things should happen in between because that's the way life works, but then you loop back to it and you feel like you're immersed in the environment that I've created. So that structure was very important to me. And I think you get that kind of structure or start to understand it from reading other people.
Okay. Well, when I love a book that turns, what like some people might view as just a place into a character, a living,
Mhm.
breathing character, and that is what Metropolitan Stories does so well with the Met. And it also has, you can see, I am a sucker for deckled edged pages, and it has them. You can't really see, but it turns. I think it turns. It's a controversial thing among readers, but I will be lured into a book that I might not otherwise have been just for that, because I think it turns it into a piece of art, a book into a piece of art. So
Well, it was important to me that the book feel like the Met. That the paperweight is actually quite fine, and the font of the book itself is actually the font that was used by the Met in the 90s for all of its catalogs. So there are lots of very subtle details in the deckled edge and all of that I wanted to kind of aggregate into the feeling of the Met in that time. And it's very specific, and I don't think anyone needs to do that calculation other than it makes a difference overall. I think all these subtle gestures always add up in the experience of the reader, even if they don't recognize what's happening.
yeah, I would
And I
agree.
think that's the Met has such a specific kind of house style, and part of the fun of writing this book, and I think why it works the way that it does for readers, is that there's a lot of authenticity in that. I mean, it is a very kind of tribal place with its own rites and rituals and bizarre procedures and traditions, and all of that texture weaves its way into these stories because that's the way that museum functions. And I think a lot of big old institutions have that way about them. And those things kind of happen over time, and you get indoctrinated into them when you go work there. And so I think over 25 years, it's sort of a story about kind of finding your tribe and finding your voice within that place. And that authenticity was really important to me. And all those little, the ways that we speak to one another at the museum were very specific, and I wanted to capture that.
Well, you did, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking the time, kind of last minute, to talk with me. It always enhances the reading experience to speak with an author and hear about your process. And for those of
Oh,
you,
great. I hope you get to the Met, and there's on my website, there's a tour of the museum
I've
that
seen it all many times,
highlights
but
from
I
the
will
book.
do it again with this in mind. Like I said, whenever I'm there with my daughter, it's one of our go-tos. That, and of course the public library. There's just some things that you always do. But the Met is always, it's never the same place twice. I mean, there's always the things that you always see, and lots of those are in here. But then we're always there for the new exhibit or whatever.
Well, and I think the objects that I chose are my objects. I mean, they're not the masterpieces of the museum by any stretch, but they're the things that I return to again and again. And that, as anyone visits the museum over time, they develop their own set of objects that are their touchstones for the, kind of claiming the museum as their own. And I think that's a wonderful thing for people to do, and to have their own checklist of objects that speak to them, and where that engage them in a way that they see them differently every time, but they're sort of old friends. And I think that's how the objects were chosen in this book, where these are my list. Not really necessarily, if I was writing this book for the Met, I think there would be a much more kind of deliberate attempt to include every curatorial department. And, this gave me the freedom to sort of write about the objects that speak to me. And I think that's what people often respond to, because they're a pretty obscure bunch of things.
Well, it's a big museum.
It's a big museum, and there's something for everyone.
There's something for everyone. Well, thank you so much, Christine. This was absolutely delightful. And
well, thank you.
I'm so happy that this book will be in more hands and, get some more exposure, because it's been such a joy discussing it with other readers too. So
great. Well, I'll let everyone know when the next one comes.
I can't wait. I hope to be an early reader. All right. Well, you have a great day.
Thanks. You too.
Okay, thanks.
Bye-bye.